Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 68, and today's guest is Jeff Goins.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
I'm Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. And today's guest is Jeff Goins. I'll introduce you to him in a second. Before we get there, let me just tell you that this is the show for people who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments, and we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works. The show today is brought to you by our book, which is also called Web Marketing That Works. And specifically, it's brought to you by the 33 marketing templates that go with it. Get your hands on those at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. So the guest today is Jeff Goins, and he is a writer. He's very passionate about finding your calling in life and pursuing it. And that's what a lot of today's podcast interview is all about. He does have a new book coming out, and we'll introduce that in the show. You can also actually download it, depending on when you're listening to this recording. You can download it before March the 24th. You can actually get a free copy delivered to your mailbox. All you need to do is pay $7 in shipping, and it's all yours. So this is actually Jeff's fourth book, and I have admired his writing for a long time. He blogs over at goinswriter.com, and he's a writer's writer. He's written lots of books. He's written guest blog articles and magazine articles for over 100 publications, and he speaks from the heart. And what I particularly like about this interview and this new book that he's got out is that the world is changing and that we are no longer tied to what we have traditionally thought of as a career or a job. We're actually free to do whatever it is we want and to find our calling and to pursue it and to live a life of happiness based around that. And that's what he has personally set out to do himself, and he shares a lot of the secrets for doing so in this interview and in his book. So the book is called The Art of Work, a proven path to discovering what you were meant to do. So with that, let me kick off the interview. Hey, it's Adam Franklin, and I'm thrilled to be joined on the line by Jeff Goins. How are you, Jeff?
Hey, Adam, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, you've got a new book called The Art of Work, and it's something that I'm really passionate about for myself because it's one of the reasons I started Bluewire. But can you tell us all about this whole concept of finding what it is you're passionate about and doing work that matters to you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that the word I use in the book is calling, and I guess that word has a lot of different connotations to people. What I mean by that word, I mean, you can use vocation, life's work, whatever sort of suits your fancy. I like the idea of a calling because, traditionally that sort of conjures these, spiritual or, larger than life questions, and I like that because most people I talk to today are talking about work, not just as a means of making a living or putting food on the table, but really about is this the thing that I'm supposed to be doing? And I think that this is this topic of doing work that matters has never been more relevant because I think that in part, technology has sort of caught up with us so that the things that used to require somebody sitting on an assembly line or making something with his or her hands for 12 hours a day. We no longer have to do that. And so we have the opportunity to think about bigger questions, not just how do I survive, but how do I actually thrive? And I think the answer to that is to really discover the reason that you were born and to be really intentional about the process of finding that answer, but also be open to the fact that what you discover may in fact surprise you.
And you're right, there are so many options, especially with the internet. Then there's so many stories and there's so many people doing different things and reaching levels of success that can be very appealing to want to emulate. What is your process for actually staying the course? Because it's so easy to go one direction and then change your mind and do something else. How do you find your calling and yes, stay the course for it?
Yeah, well, I describe it as a path, so if you think about that, that word picture, literally, I mean, imagine that you're out hiking in the woods somewhere and there is a beaten path before you, and then all around you there's, grass or, shrubs or trees or whatever. There's sort of, the wild terrain. If you're smart, if you're wise, you are likely going to walk the path that thousands of people before you have walked, because there's not like hopefully dead bodies strewn across the place. So like that it works, that it gets you to where you want to go, that people didn't die on the journey. And I think that discovering your purpose is a lot like that. The problem is we can't see the path, at least with sort of conventional eyes. And so the book is really about illuminating that path by through research and reading lots of other people's stories, and then going out and interview people who are doing it today, average, ordinary people who have found the opportunity to do extraordinary work. So, I spend the book sort of answering that question, Adam. But really, in a nutshell, I think it begins with listening to your life, paying attention to the passions and skills that you have and the things that you've done in the past that have resonated with other people. There are clearly things that we've done well and things that, we've not done well. I've never been particularly good at math, so my dream, my dream should probably not be to be an accountant. So, pay attention to the things that you're good at, be aware of what resonates and what doesn't. Then study the path of those who've gone before you. I love reading biographies and I mean, you're doing this with your show, listening to other people who have, unlocked a piece of their purpose or discovered something that seems mysterious to a lot of people. Find out, what you don't know by learning from other people. And then, the kind of third part of that, and it's the most difficult part, is to stay the course and just keep walking the path. And I think that it's a little bit more generous than we may realize. I think that this idea that you need to have a plan or that your calling is just one thing, I don't think that's true. I think that throughout your life, most of our failures and setbacks and the things that feel like obstacles can, in fact, be used to create your life's work. And so I think more than anything, you just want to have a mindset that you're going to move in the direction of your purpose, even if you aren't quite clear what that looks like. I think that clarity comes with action. You don't wait for an epiphany. You have to start moving. But having that mindset that you're going to use whatever life throws at you and use it as part of the process is instrumental in getting to where you want to go.
There was quite a few good points in there, Jeff. Firstly, you saying that you weren't good at maths, so maybe you shouldn't become an accountant. But in my personal journey, I was really quite good at science at school. And then when I did science at university, I realized when we had to niche down or niche down, as you Americans say, I started doing organic chemistry. And then I realized, boy, I'm not actually quite as good at this as I thought. And anyway, so I bombed out of chemistry and then ended up starting this marketing business. But in the early days, we started as a web design business, even though we were non-technical and we didn't have any desire to learn the technical skills. But we were passionate about marketing and passionate about running a business and then hiring the technical skills in-house. So the path can take you on this weird and wonderful journey. And I totally agree with that concept of the obstacles can help guide the way, because obviously whatever your calling is, there's going to be lots and lots of obstacles. And I've certainly found that I look forward to them in some respect, because I kind of feel like if there's an obstacle that I'm going through or the business is going through, then it's also someone else out there who may be trying to get to the same place I am. Maybe they're just giving up, or maybe they're changing and pivoting off to something else. So some really fascinating points there. You talk about failure leading to success. How does this work?
Well, you talked about you just mentioned the term pivoting, and I love that term because I think that most people get the wrong idea about failure. If I want to, go play professional tennis and my first try at it, I fail, that's not necessarily a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. As you mentioned, anytime that you encounter an obstacle, that could be a sign that you might actually be, on the right course. I think that anything worth doing tends to not be easy. Excellence, rarely happens as a result of staying comfortable. You really have to push yourself, try new things, and work through difficulties if you're going to do anything that matters. And so if we run into obstacles, even failure, that's not necessarily a sign that, we shouldn't be doing this. We don't have any right to do that. I think that's sort of the emotional response you get when you fail at something. There's this voice of insecurity inside of your head. At least it lives inside of my head, where it says, what right do you have to attempt this? You need to just go back, get in line. You're not one of the special people. This isn't for you. Just kind of, go fall in line and succumb to the status quo. But what I found through studying lots and lots of biographies of remarkable people like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs and even Mother Teresa, people who left their mark on the world in very unique but equally, indelible ways. They all started out heading in one direction, and then something happened, typically some sort of devastating failure, some sort of setback, a change of course. Maybe they just decided they wanted to do something different, but something happened that changed their direction. Adam, you'd kind of described your path as a windy one, and I find that to be the norm much more than the exception. The problem is when we read all these self-help books, they all tell you that it's easy and you just, take 7 steps to this or, 12 ways to do that. And the reality is it is a windy, confusing process of figuring out why you were born. But an instrumental part of the process is failure. Albert Einstein failed a lot before he became this household name. So did Walt Disney, and so did all these people that we now go, oh, these people are successful. And you look at their lives and they all have this commonality of not just like one big failure, but lots and lots of failures. I mean, look at the career of Steve Jobs. He had like kind of a decade of failure where he, got fired from the company that he started. He started another company that failed. And then he kind of like quietly went, and started working on this company called Pixar that nobody had ever heard about before. And I think that there are 2 ways to process failure. One is to, let it kind of adopt it into your identity and think of yourself as a failure. The other way to think of it as is something that happened that you can learn from. And it seems to me that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary people is not that they fail, but rather how they fail. And I think great failure is really a pivot point. It's an opportunity that when you run into an obstacle, you've got to change direction a little bit, find a way to kind of work around the failure so that you can keep moving. And if you're too stubborn to change directions, too stubborn to admit what you didn't do wrong or something that you did just didn't quite work, then you're going to keep running into that obstacle. But the smart people pivot. And a pivot isn't, usually a complete 180. It's often just moving in a few degrees one direction or the other so that you can keep moving forward until you run into the next obstacle and you have to pivot again.
It's funny how you mentioned that, the failure is definitely a part of it. And it's often for a decade at least. And I was just thinking before you said it, I've been running Bluewire now for 10 years with my business partner, Toby. And it feels like there's always failures and there's always obstacles. But the fact is, I guess you learn from them and you keep going and it keeps making you stronger and you learn so much from it. There's this interesting dichotomy, I think, as well with the stuff you talk about. Firstly, that in order to grow and in order to achieve this success, there's a level of discomfort. So each time you've got to push yourself outside your comfort zone in order to grow and in order to learn. But there's a lot of people who, and the book talks about striving for happiness at the same time. How do you balance that continual discomfort with the fact that that's the path to happiness for the people that, might be waiting in line and doing the status quo type thing, lining up for their job or what have you? How would you encourage them to address that dichotomy there?
So, yeah, I mean, it is uncomfortable. And are you saying that that's sort of like the discomfort can, sort of make you feel unhappy and, what to do with that?
Well, no, basically, that in order to reach that level of happiness,
yeah,
you do have to go through failures and you do have to go through discomfort all the way along the line, but that does reach that happiness stage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would caution people listening to this to sort of dichotomize happiness and discomfort, to assume that, you know, I have to go through all of this crap to reach a level of happiness. I think that, you know, the path that I'm describing really is a lifelong process. I mean, you talked about running your business for 10 years and you're still experiencing, you know, these failures and setbacks. And my guess is, although it may, you know, I don't know if it feels frequent or not, you know, it's probably not quite at the magnitude that it was before. And if it is, the successes are, you know, also bigger. And you look back at, you know, when you were first starting out, I do this and I go, oh my gosh, like I knew nothing. I can't believe I, you know, survived that. I was a complete idiot. And now I feel like if I fail, I kind of go, oh yeah, like I'm used to this. We can figure this out. That'll be all right. But I do think it never ends. You know, this journey never really ends until you die. And I think if we're living our lives waiting to arrive at a certain point of happiness or greatness, we're going to spend our lives pretty miserably, you know, waiting for this moment to arrive. Now, so what do we do kind of with that in-between time between, you know, now and when we die? Do we spend it searching for opportunities to feel more comfortable and to just be okay? Or do we really strive to find the things that are going to challenge us to grow so that when our lives end, we can have the satisfaction of knowing, man, like I really did go for it. I really did give my all and my life mattered. I think at the end of our lives, everybody wants to know that their life mattered. But I think the challenge is to do things on a daily basis that bring meaning and satisfaction to what you're doing. Psychologist Viktor Frankl talked a lot about this. You know, he basically said that if you want to be happy, you have to have some sort of redemptive view of your suffering, that you have to, if something bad has happened to you at some point in your life, you were abused or you went bankrupt or, you know, your girlfriend broke up with you, whatever the magnitude of the failure is, you have to have a certain attitude of saying, okay, like this can be used for good. I can forgive my enemies. I can overcome from failures. I'm not stuck in that. You also have to have somebody that you are working for, whether that's a spouse or a customer or, you know, somebody that isn't yourself, you know, somebody, a relationship that is kind of worth living for. And then lastly, you have to have a project that is bigger than you. And so when, you know, Viktor Frankl was in the German concentration camps in World War II, this was what got him through several concentration camps and allowed him to survive when people were literally dying of despair because they had nothing to live for. And, you know, so he writes this book, Man's Search for Meaning, one of the best-selling books of the 20th century, and applies this concept of logotherapy to save people's lives. So, you know, like, what do we do with that? Well, I think that in our own ways, every day we ought to be thinking about those things. You know, who am I doing this for other than myself? And again, that can be your customer. You know, I mean, it doesn't have to be some, you know, great, you know, lofty or romantic relationship. It can just be the fact that you realize your life isn't about you. You've got some work that in some way is bigger than you, and you're not feeling sorry for yourself. And I think if you have those things, those are uncomfortable things to do, by the way. Those are not easy things to do, to, you know, think about somebody other than yourself, to have something that's bigger than you, and, you know, to think fondly of your failures and suffering. But incidentally, I mean, almost ironically, that's exactly what we need to be happy.
I've certainly found that myself, Jeff, and that each time there's been a failure, it's an opportunity to learn and also grow. And whether it's a failure or not, I should put failure in one category and then discomfort in another. Anytime I do something new, it's uncomfortable. Like when you learn to ride a bike or you learn to drive a car, before you've got your license and you're thinking, man, how do these people drive these vehicles on the road? It just seems so overwhelming and so dangerous and everything's moving so fast. But of course, once you go through that discomfort, you go through that learning process, then all of a sudden it opens up this whole new freedom that you can drive a car anywhere you want to go. And I've certainly found with business particularly that when there is a challenge and it gives you that feeling of discomfort, that's really the sign that you're onto the right thing, and you should do that, because just on the other side of that discomfort, there's this whole new world of possibility. So I guess I've been trying to seek out opportunities that give me that feeling, because I trust the path, and hopefully it's going to deliver something really valuable on the other side.
One more thing I would add to that, Adam, there's another psychologist by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he's a Russian guy, has a real fun name to say.
You did a great job. Whether it's correct or not, I've got no idea. But
I say that name. He's got a great TED Talk. Also kind of grew up in, during, World War II, and, saw some of those, atrocities of that era. He says the secret to happiness is being in a state that he calls a state of flow. And he says flow is the intersection between challenge and competency. And he says that if you're doing something that you're really good at, you're really competent at it, but it's not challenging, it's boring. Right. So if you have a job that's too easy for you, this kind of describes what I was doing. I was working at a nonprofit for 7 years before I quit that job and became a full-time writer. I was good at it. I was, relatively happy at it. I didn't hate my job. I liked it. I kept getting, raises and promotions in my job, and my boss was very proud of me and was probably never going to fire me unless I royally screwed something up. In fact, I royally screwed up a few things and he still wouldn't fire me, just because he was a great boss. And he said, well, I don't want to pay to, have somebody else learn that lesson. So, very gracious guy, but I was good at it. And the challenges were that I experienced, when I first got into that job versus, 7 years later, just weren't there. I'd kind of, in some ways, felt like I had outgrown that position. And my boss even said that when he gave me his blessing to go, start my own business. And so I was in that place where I was just feeling bored. And then the flip side of that is if the challenge is too hard, like if I were to be an accountant, the challenge is too hard and the competency isn't quite there, it creates anxiety. But Csikszentmihalyi says that in between those two kinds of extremes, you can live in this state of flow where it's really, really difficult, but you're also really, really good at it. And, the difficulty is forcing you to keep growing, and I think that the task needs to be a little bit more difficult than you have the competency to deliver on, because that forces you to grow, which I look at the happiest times of my lives, the most driven, satisfied I've ever been. It was always when I had a task in front of me and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to, do it, but I kind of believed, in some sort of intuitive way that I had what it took to get there. And I was in that state of flow. And so what's interesting is we're talking about discomfort here. And Csikszentmihalyi would say that you are your happiest when you're a little bit uncomfortable in a state of doing something where you've got the competency, but it's also really challenging and forcing you to grow.
Now, in the book, there's the 10,000 hour rule that a lot of listeners are going to be familiar with. Now, you've got a slightly different take on that. Can you share your take on the 10,000 hour rule?
Sure. Well, so people may be familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. He kind of coined that term 10,000 hour rule. But he was pulling that from a study by a guy named Kay Anders Ericsson, who, led a team of researchers really trying to figure out what does it take to become a world-class performer. And one of the things that they noticed when they were studying all of these musicians was that they had, if they were going to be at the master level, they had, at least 10,000 hours worth of practice. And that was a description, not a prescription, meaning they didn't monitor somebody, at hour zero of practice and then 10,000 hours later they go, wow, she's a genius. It was just one of the factors in a whole set of factors that led to excellence. The problem with that is people read that book, and I think Gladwell actually does a good job of describing the study, but people read 10,000 hour rule and they go, okay, all I need is 10,000 hours of practice and I'll be amazing. And if you read that actual study, I think it's called the theory of deliberate practice. It basically says that if you are going to become great at something, you have to do it to the point of utter exhaustion. You have to do it in the right context, meaning you have to put the hours in, but you also have to have the right facilities to train in. You have to have the right equipment. Kind of depends on whatever your craft or practice is. But you have to have the right, stuff to work with. I learned this when I was training for a half marathon. I was running in hiking shoes and I kept getting hurt. And then finally I bought a $150 pair of running shoes and I completed the half marathon. So, having the right equipment can help you practice. And then I think the last thing that he says is not only do it to the point of exhaustion, you have to do it repetitively, again and again and again every day, but the activity, and this is kind of interesting, he says the activity can't be inherently motivating. It can't be fun, which is sort of weird. But I think what he means by that is if you're just doing something that's comfortable, then you're not really pushing yourself and you're not really practicing. You're just sort of doing a hobby. And if you want to practice a skill, whether it's marketing or playing the saxophone or writing, if you want to get really, really good at what you do, and I would argue that if this is what you're meant to do, it really deserves your all. If you want to get really, really good at it, you have to do it in the right context, putting in, using the right equipment, putting in the right amount of, enough hours. You also have to do it with a certain amount of intensity. You have to do it to the point of utter exhaustion. And the activity itself, it's not that you can't actually enjoy it. It's just that the way in which you do it can't be inherently motivating. You have to max yourself out. And I liken this to my writing. Like, I love writing, but I'm not inherently motivated to do it. I look for every excuse in the world to not do it. And I think there's this idea that, like, if your work was fun, like if you could go into work every day and it didn't feel like work, then you have arrived. And I guess that sounds like a good idea. But if I go to work every day and I didn't feel like I worked, then I probably didn't work hard enough. I go home not depressed or mad or frustrated, but I go home exhausted after a long day of work because, frankly, I want to be great at what I do. And so I'm doing what I do to the point of utter exhaustion because I think the craft itself, the practice deserves it. As a business owner, I think my customers deserve the very best that I could give them. As a writer, I think the same thing for my readers. And now knowing what I know about motivation and excellence and, comfort, I know that this is actually what's going to make me happiest. The sense of going home at the end of the day and feeling like I did the best that I could do. When I don't do that, I feel kind of depressed at the end of the day.
Now, let's steer this around to circle around and look at some marketing aspects here, Jeff, because let's say that somebody they found their calling, they've turned it into more than a hobby. It's a calling that actually pays them a living. How important is marketing for this person versus actually just doing their craft? Do you have to spend half your time doing your calling and then the other half telling the world about it, or how does that work?
I mentioned earlier, one of the things that you should do is listen to your life. And that was a term I borrowed from a guy named Frederick Buechner. And Frederick Buechner had this really interesting career. He was this best-selling novelist. Had this, in his early 20s, had this novel that just, sold really well in the 50s or 60s, I think. And got retired from that. Ended up becoming a pastor for a little while. Then became a school teacher, then ultimately ended up becoming a writer again, kind of had this circular career. And he says, he has this sort of, he's got probably the most famous quote about vocation. He says, your calling is the place where your deep joy meets the world's deepest need. And I think that we have this idea of a calling or a passion as this thing that you just really like doing that you hope someday people would pay you for. And that just doesn't work, right? Like, it's not realistic. And I don't think it's the way that life is supposed to work. You're not just supposed to find the things that make you happy. You're also supposed to find the things that are going to make a contribution to the world, that are going to make life for other people better. And, so we think about this in the context of marketing. There's a lot of people who are, basically selling this idea that, especially on the internet, that you could just pursue your passion and people will pay you for that. And you don't have to worry about making your message or your product matter to other people. But if we think about this Buechner quote, the intersection between what do people want and what do I love and what am I good at and where those things intersect, that's really, your sweet spot. And I would argue that that intersection is actually the thing that's your calling. Not just the stuff that you like doing. Like, I love homemade guacamole. I'm not trying to make a career out of that. Yeah, I'm sure there's a demand for it, but I don't know that I'm the best in the world at it or that I need to be. It's just a fun little hobby. It's not my calling. My calling is this, this thing that I do with my writing and my blog where I'm connecting with people in a way that's, changing their lives. And so whenever I write a book, launch an online course, do a lot of, different things, especially with my online business, I'm thinking about how is this going to affect people? But I'm also thinking about how does this resonate with, my own passions and skills? So when we think about marketing, I think is really the process of figuring out what do people want and then what do I have to offer them? And if you think too much about what people want and neglect what you have to offer them, then you start pandering to people or you start selling them on things that you actually can't deliver on. And that's very dangerous. You're going to basically end up disappointing people, and you're going to be called a liar, and rightly so. And if you spend too much time on just you and your passion and your craft, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be really, really good, you should, but if you spend too much time on you and not enough time on the audience, nobody's going to care. And I think a successful business, and certainly, smart marketing, is about finding the intersection between those two things.
Awesome. And now just one final question before I guess we close. You say the next generation will be more entrepreneurial and flexible than ever before. I'm certainly seeing a huge shift in this with my group of friends and my generation. Why will the next generation have to be more entrepreneurial than ever before?
So Forbes just came out with this interesting study not too long ago about the workforce. They're sort of based on current trends of self-employment and the size of companies and just the way things are headed. They have predicted by the year 2030, and it could be as soon as sometime in 2020, in the 2020s, that over half of the workforce will be freelance because organizations are getting smaller. Outsourcing is becoming more common. And I'm seeing this too. I'm sure you're seeing this as well. People are valuing their freedom more and wanting, the opportunity to work from home or be more mobile and, have more control over how they spend their work time. And so you're seeing not only, entrepreneurs, but, freelance, independent contractors. You're seeing that community grow already. And what's interesting is if this study proves to be true, and everything seems to suggest that we're on that course, in our lifetime, in the next 10 or 15 years, this is not going to be a choice like it feels like right now. Like it still feels kind of like, you're on the cutting edge if you've, quit your day job and, started your own online business or something. You're still kind of weird. Like, when I'm at dinner parties,
totally weird.
I'm the only person who's doing that for the most part. But it's not going to be weird in our lifetime. It's going to become the majority, at least in the sense that we won't have traditional jobs where you go in and work 40, 50, 60 hours a week for one boss. You're going to have a bunch of different gigs. And if you can learn now how to be proactive about that and know how to manage your schedule and, expectations from different clients or, manage multiple streams of income, you're going to be ahead of the curve. But one way or another, it's going to be, basically the career of the future.
Wow. I totally agree with you there, Jeff, from what I've experienced and seen through my 10 years in business. And it's fascinating. I think it's a really exciting way to be living and it's a really exciting way to be working. Now, how can people get their hands on The Art of Work, your book?
Yeah, so it will be on March 24th. It'll be available wherever books are sold. But, depending on when people are listening to this, we're doing a special pre-order, for anybody who pre-orders the book before March 24th. So between now and, through March 23rd, you can go and order the book and pay a flat shipping rate for anywhere in the world, $6.99, US dollars. And you'll get the book. You'll get a bunch of digital bonuses. You'll get a free online course walking through a lot of these concepts that we're talking about here, a video course that I teach. You'll get all of that for free just for paying $6.99 to ship the book, which is a real paperback book, and you also get the digital book, as an instant download. If you go to artofworkbook.com, you can find out more about that.
That's extremely generous of you, Jeff. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best for the book launch and everything else. And I think the next 5 or 10 years in business and in life is just going to be so exciting if even half the stuff we've spoken about comes into fruition. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks so much, Adam.
Cheers, Jeff. That's a wrap for my chat with Jeff Goins. I was fascinated by that study that he cited that predicted jobs as we know them today will reduce by 50% by the year 2030 or maybe late in the 2020s. And that's the first time I've heard that mentioned in an actual study. I've certainly felt it myself and from my own experiences, I guess, in the 10 years I've been in business with Toby, I've seen so many people lose their jobs as a result of redundancies. I've seen companies close their doors. There's been high-profile companies. And a lot of the people that have lost their jobs or chosen to leave their jobs have started this new career as a freelancer, as an entrepreneur, building their own list of clients, working on projects that they are passionate about. And that's certainly a lot how Bluewire looks these days. We are thrilled to be working on certain projects and to be packaging up our own courses and programs, as well as doing in-person consulting and some speaking and events. But I really see the future of what we do as a business being much more online based, because through the internet everything scales. You can reach people all over the world. And one of the things that Tobes and I have noticed is that since we started releasing our marketing templates, with the first one of those being in 2010, the web strategy planning template that we co-created with David Meerman Scott, since we published that and realized that people from all over the world found it, they would download it, they would opt into our Bluewire news list, and now we've got readers in over 100 countries. So really, being a consulting business is very geography dependent, and now that we've got readers all over the world, it makes total sense, as we've been doing for the last couple of years, is to be packaging up a lot of the programs and the material into online training programs, and really being able to live this life that, certainly Toby and I have aspired to, and we can take it anywhere. That'll be one of my challenges this year, to move to another country for a stint, to see how that goes, working fully remotely in a different country. But it's certainly achievable. I spent some time doing that last year as well. But really, to find that calling, and I'm thrilled that Tobes and I we love what we do. We love doing these podcasts, our blog, working with our clients and creating the programs and writing our Bluewire news, and really sharing the experiences and the journey that we've been going on. It's awesome, and it's interesting that Jeff Goins has written a whole book about how to do it, about how to find that happiness. I certainly have really enjoyed it, and anyway, that's enough about me, but I think it is worth pursuing, and I don't know too many people that have given it a go and regretted it. So if you are considering finding and then following your calling, give it a go. So this podcast was brought to you by our book, which is called Web Marketing That Works. And you can get your hands on the 33 marketing templates for free at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. And of course, we want these podcasts to deliver actionable advice. So your feedback and questions are welcome. Please drop me a line on email, adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au, or send me a tweet at Franklin_Adam. If you enjoyed the show, we would love it if you left us a review on iTunes. Until the next show, take care, and I'll see you next time.